Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaurhata Vrinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaurhata Vrinda. Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare.
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Chanavallabha Jaya Girivardhari Gopi Chanavallabha Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Bajajanaran Chana Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Bajajanaranjana Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Chanavallabha Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Chanavallabha Jaya Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vajajanaranjana Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Vajajanaranjana Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Yamunatiravanachari Jayakunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya So Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Welcome to this evening's Bhagavad Gita class. We'll continue reading from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, and this week we'll read text 32. If you have your phones or something, we can go through together. Okay. Evam bahu vidha yagya Vita brahmano mukhe Karma gyan vidhi tan sarvan Evam gyatva vimokshase Evam bahu vita yagya Vitata brahmano mukhe Karma gyan vidithan sarvan Evam gyatva vimokshase. Sorry, I might speak a little softly. I've got a bit of a sore throat, so please forgive me. Anyway, would one of you like to try? Evam bahu vita yagya Vitata brahmano mukhe Karmajan viditan sarvam Evam gyatva vimokshase. So word for word. Evam, thus. Bahu vida, various kinds of. Yagya, sacrifices. Vitata, are spread. Brahmana, of the Vedas. Mukhe, through the mouth. Karma gyan, born of work. Vidhi, you should know. Tan, them. Sarvan, all. Evam, thus. Gyatva, knowing. Vimokshase, you will be liberated. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. So translation. All these different types of sacrifice are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work. Knowing them as such, you will become liberated. And purport by Prabhupada. Different types of sacrifice, as discussed above, are mentioned in the Vedas to suit the different types of workers. Because men are so deeply absorbed in the bodily concept, these sacrifices are so arranged that one can work either with the body, with the mind, or with the intelligence. But all of them are recommended for ultimately bringing about the liberation from the body. This is confirmed by the Lord herewith from His own mouth. So that's the end of the purport. It's a short purport. Actually, first let's do the Mangala chant. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpa Tarunvyascha Kripasindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pachadine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pasyatya Deshitarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, kindly requesting your blessings, those in the temple room behind the curtains and watching online, so that we can together come to some conclusions about this verse from the Gita and Prabhupada's purport. So it's a short purport and a relatively simple verse, so I thought we could go through the sacrifices that Krishna actually mentions in the previous verses, so that we get an idea of why he's saying this now. Prabhupada mentions that they're all to help elevate us, and the Lord out of His compassion gives so many methods to reach Him, to purify ourselves from wherever we're at currently. And ultimately, as Prabhupada says, they're all methods prescribed to bring us to the platform of the soul, to help purify us enough to understand that we're not this body, we're the soul. And obviously once we have that understanding, then naturally we'll begin to engage in devotional service. So let's quickly go through the different types of sacrifice, and I'm sorry if we went actually through this in class as well. So this might be a bit of repetition for you. So we'll go through it quickly. Okay, so in text, so there's basically five texts where Krishna outlines different sacrifices that people engage in to worship Him, or different parts of Himself. So text 25 is, some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. So some approach the demigods for material benefits, and some actually offer themselves into the Brahman, into the fire of the Supreme Brahman. They themselves become the offering. In text 26, Krishna says, some, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control, and others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. So in this verse, Krishna is saying that the brahmacharis turn their senses inward, they restrict, they restrain, and they focus all of their energies inwards, for the purpose of, mainly through hearing. Whereas the opposite of that is the householders, the regulated householders or the grihastas. They sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of senses, so they turn their senses outwards, but in a regulated way, and offer sacrifice in that way, which is equally as much of a sacrifice, to be regulated and external. And then in text 27, Krishna says, others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses. Sorry, I went down too far. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses offer the function of all the senses and of the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. So this is talking about Ashtanga Yoga, the pranayam, through control of the breath, which ultimately controls the mind and allows us to focus our mind and senses on self-realization. And then Krishna comes to text 28, he says, having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. So different ways of sacrificing wealth, through austerities, through yoga or knowledge. These are all different yagyas. And in the purport, Prabhupada says that actually none of these can help you attain Krishna consciousness, but they're, like we discussed, gradual means of purification. And then finally in text 29 he says, still others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint remain in trance, practiced by offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming, and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. So again, further pranayam discussed, and like we discussed, when I first read this, I began to do these breathing exercises, but I didn't have the understanding, and somehow I must have skipped it, because Prabhupada in the purport clearly says that in Krishna consciousness we automatically control the senses through our engagement of the senses. And one thing we also discussed is, it's interesting, Prabhupada in the purports to all these verses is seemingly contradicting Krishna's words, right? Krishna's saying, you can approach me like this, through breathing, through this, and then Prabhupada in the purport is saying, actually this doesn't really work so well, especially in this age, so best just to do devotional service. So you might question, why is Prabhupada seemingly contradicting Krishna? But it's because Krishna at the end of the Gita says Sarva Dharma Prityaja, and Prabhupada is giving us that conclusion throughout the Gita. So he's giving us the consistent message of the Gita throughout, not just at the end. And people sometimes ask, how is it that just chanting Hare Krishna is the highest yajna? How can that be greater than these huge sacrifices and things, just chanting, saying words? How can that be the highest yajna? Because like we discussed, and Prabhupada says in his purport that these yajnas are help to purify you of the bodily identification, so that we become situated in our knowledge of us being a spirit soul. And the ultimate expression of that realization is the Hare Krishna mantra, because it's an expression of saying, please engage me in your devotional service, which is asking for our soul's eternal engagement in the service of Krishna in Vrindavan. So it's the highest yoga because it's the highest expression of that realization that I'm not this body, but I'm actually spirit soul, and therefore as a spirit soul I should be engaged in my eternal constitutional position So actually, preparing for this class, I did a bit of research on the word sacrifice. It's not Vedic, but from Latin, it comes from the word sacred, which we discussed also, but it comes from the word sacred, which means to give up something for the sake of another. And I was thinking, how does a sacrifice become sacred? Because it only works, as Krishna says, if one offers me with love and devotion, these things. So sacrifice also for us only works when love and devotion is involved. And so actually you're investing some of your heart, you're investing some of yourself in that sacrifice. And so then it only really becomes sacred when the heart is involved. So I was thinking, because that's the definition of sacred, is to invest part of yourself into that. So sacrifice similarly only really is successful when we actually invest some of ourselves, some of our heart into that sacrifice, like Krishna says. And yeah, on another side note, interestingly, I clicked on the word sacred as well to find out where that comes from. And actually it came from an ancient English word, Godkund. This is an ancient English, I don't know, Hebrew or something, which means sacred cow. It's interesting, no? Which, so some connection there with the Vedic understanding that cows are sacred. And actually that's where the word sacred came from. This is the ancient English word, so they also had some Vedic understanding that a cow is sacred even back then, which is very interesting. And the verse before this one tells us that no one can live happily without sacrifice. Krishna says that without sacrifice there's no happiness, because self-absorption, it can't lead to happiness. And we see especially in modern society, we're very good at increasing the comforts of our life. We're very good at creating so-called material happiness, wealth, different sense engagements. So material happiness is booming from an external point of view, but how many are actually happy? And they're not happy because they don't please the source of happiness. They don't perform yajna, which is what Krishna says in the verse, that without performing yajna, no one can become happy, because they're actually pleasing the source of happiness, who's the Supreme Lord Krishna. And so I was just meditating on yajna now that we've gone through these yagas, and I was thinking, what does it really mean for us as devotees also? Because we've already come to the point that we know that we don't need to do these other kind of yajnas, these different things that Krishna is. We know this now. We understand the philosophy to some extent. So I was just meditating, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for us as devotees? And Prabhupada mentions in the purport, in the verse before, that the human form of life is actually a loophole to get out of the cycle of birth and death. It's we can attain the highest happiness. He says we can attain the highest happiness and be promoted to the spiritual planets. So really our sacrifice, our yajna in this life, now that we've come to Krishna consciousness, is also to give our life, to sacrifice, to follow Krishna's order, final order, Sarvadharma Prityaja. That's the ultimate sacrifice we can make. And then I was thinking of the example of our acharyas, and okay, we understand Sarvadharma Prityaja, but what does that actually mean? What does it mean to surrender? And then, but looking at their example, we see that there's a huge emphasis on their willingness to help others, to uplift others in sacrifice of their own happiness, in sacrifice of their own comforts. I was kind of meditating on that, as that seems to be our yajna, is the sacrifice of our life for the sake of giving whatever we've received so far to others, helping uplift them. And Prahlad Maharaj says in Canto 7, two beautiful verses. He says, "O best of great personalities, I am not at all afraid." This is Prahlad Maharaj offering prayers to Nrsimhadev after Nrsimhadev has come and killed Hiranyakashipu. So Prahlad Maharaj says, "O best of the great personalities, I am not at all afraid of material existence, for wherever I stay I am fully absorbed in thought of your glories and activities. My concern is only for the fools and rascals who are making elaborate plans for material happiness and maintaining their families, societies and countries. I am simply concerned with love for them. My dear Lord Nrsimhadev, I see that there are many saintly persons indeed, but they are interested only in their own deliverance, not caring for the big cities and towns. They go to the Himalayas or the forests to meditate with vows of silence. They are not interested in delivering others. But as for me, however, I do not wish to be liberated alone, leaving aside all those poor fools and rascals. I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to shelter at your lotus feet." These are incredible prayers from Prahlad Maharaj, giving the perfect example of that compassion, that willingness to sacrifice his own happiness and even his own liberation, even his own permanent association with the Lord. And we see that in so many lives of devotees across religions, of course, as Jesus Christ sacrificed his life. And Chaitanya Charitamrita we hear about Vasudev Datta, an incredible devotee who also in a similar mood offered, asked Lord Chaitanya, please let me take on the suffering of all these people. I can't, please don't liberate me without, I'd rather take on their suffering, And recently, even more recent devotees we see in our ISKCON, there's examples like Bhaktivedanta Swami, who he desired the same. He offered his life again. At the end he said many times to devotees that this illness that I've got is because I prayed that I want to alleviate some of the suffering of the burden that ISKCON, the devotees in ISKCON are feeling. And that was his sacrifice. And of course Prabhupada again was the same. One time some South Indian this was at the very end of Prabhupada's life, some South Indian Brahmanas came to the Vrindavan temple, and they saw that Prabhupada, they'd installed a deity of Prabhupada, but Prabhupada was still alive. And so according to Shastra, you should never install a deity of yourself while you're still alive, because what happens is that many people come to the temple, they touch the feet of so they would touch Prabhupada's feet, and of course we understand that when you touch someone's feet you're giving sinful reactions. And so you should never install a deity of yourself, because you'd be receiving thousands of people's sinful reactions every day. And so these South Indian Brahmanas came to Prabhupada, and they, with great love, they kind of chastised him. They were actually very sincere devotees, very nice devotees, but they kind of chastised Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, do you not realize what you've done? You're accepting all of these. You're accepting all of these people's sinful. They're all coming and touching your feet every day. Thousands of people are coming, and this is probably why you're sick, Prabhupada. Why don't you? You should get rid of that deity in the temple. And Prabhupada said, "No, don't you understand? This is why I've come. He said, this is why I came to take on the suffering." So this is the mood of all of our acharyas, all of the great devotees we see. That this incredible desire and willingness to give themselves for the upliftment of others. And I was going to read it. I didn't bring the book with me from Bhaktivedanta Manor, his book. But anyway, we're coming up to time, so we can move past that anyway. So Raghunath Das Goswami says that a sadhu is paradukha dukhi. He feels the happiness and distress of others as if it was his own happiness and distress. And I just think in the modern world we're so detached from people's happiness, from people's suffering, and from people's happiness, to the extent that we watch movies and we become completely absorbed, or we, I don't know, TV series or something, we become completely absorbed in the happiness and distress of other people, because that's a natural tendency for us as people to be involved in other people's happiness and distress. And so people watch movies, they watch TV, and they become completely absorbed in the happiness and distress of others. But then they turn a blind eye to those directly around them, their happiness and distress, their suffering. And I was wondering, why is it that we do that? Because I think it's down again to what this verse says, is a sense of responsibility, and a sense that on the TV, when it turns off, there's no, they don't have any responsibility to do something about it. And that's what Krishna is saying in this verse, that those who don't perform yagyas, they'll never be happy. Because we have the tendency to not want to take any responsibility and not perform sacrifice, because sacrifice means something unselfish. So people love this. They can get absorbed in someone's happiness and distress on the TV, but when they turn it off, there's no responsibility on their behalf. But those around them, they turn a blind eye, because if they get too closely involved, then they also might have to sacrifice something of their own. They might have to do something about it. And sometimes it's even more degraded, in the sense that we sometimes subtly find pleasure in the distress of others also. I mean, we can all, because it makes us feel a bit better about our own situation, our own suffering. Okay, my suffering's not so bad, these guys are going through much worse. I'm glad it's not me. So in a subtle sense, sometimes we also have that there, because we want to avoid this sacrifice, we want to avoid this austerity of performing sacrifice, of performing yajna, and trying to help people. And so as a final thought, I was thinking of how do we build this compassion, how do we increase this desire to perform sacrifice and help others. It's a process of increasing our gratitude, because the more we appreciate what we have, the less we'll take for granted our situation, and the more we're willing to sacrifice time and energy into helping others. And sometimes actually, I was hearing from Bhakti, or reading from Bhaktivedanta Swami, this part of the book I wanted to read, but I forgot. But he said sometimes it's healthy for us to also see suffering. Sometimes it's healthy, at least to remind ourselves of how fortunate we are in our situation. And in that way we can also stimulate this compassion. And naturally then, naturally when we appreciate what we have, then we also have that, naturally the desire awakens to share that with others when we have deep gratitude. So then we're willing to perform sacrifice and help others. We don't find it difficult in that. So that was a few thoughts I had. I don't know if there's any questions or comments on this. Yes, sir.
His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Maharaj as well, and other gurus within ISKCON have mentioned about, in terms of like television programs and these things, that we can see so many, so much violence and different things. And the thing is that even if it seemingly doesn't affect us externally, still internally we can go through the process of actually witnessing this violence as if it was, as if it was actually happened. So this violence and all these things actually have an impact on us, which is not healthy psychologically, actually.
Definitely.
Yeah,
it's like we bombard. It's like we become numb. Like emotionally overloaded. We become numbed and hard-hearted because, like you said, from such a young age we're exposed to extreme, to the point where violence actually becomes an entertainment for kids in video games and things, shooting is like the most popular thing, right? From very, very young. Like, we're so desensitized that violence becomes an entertainment. And so then you wonder why we have problems later on of trying to develop compassion and things, because we've had a whole life of being bombarded by this. And like, it's crazy. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Just on that point, thank you very much for that talk. But on the point of compassion, back to Vikash Swami, he's sharing his memories of Prabhupada. I'm not sure if you've seen, but Prabhupada's giving this lecture, and he's sharing a story that he heard when he was a child of there's a father and a young son, and the father is killing a chicken, and the young son is crying. He's saying, "Why are you killing this chicken?" And the father is just saying, "Get over it. It's chicken. You have to eat." And Prabhupada is telling this story, and he's getting very, very emotional. He's just so much suffering. And then back to Vikash Swami, he goes on to elaborate how likely that son would have grown up and said the same thing to his son. And this way they get more hard-hearted, it passes down. Whereas you see, Prabhupada, it's just one animal, it's a story of one animal being killed, but Prabhupada is just so touched by it. This conditioning gets in from a very early age.
Yeah, so soft-hearted, compassionate. Smallest things like, all the time he has a different vision of the world. Sometimes in the car, on just seeing people passing on the street, he would just begin to weep, saying, "Don't you see the suffering of these people?" So it's just a different lens, like Krishna says, Premanjana, Brahmasamhita, Premanjana Chodita Bhakti Valochanena, eyes glazed with the self of love. So, different vision of the world. Yeah, we have some conditioning to get through. But it'll come.
Can I ask a question as
Yes.
well? I really like the point you made about, the chanting of Hare Krishna is the greatest sacrifice, because it's bringing us to it's an expression of our true position. We're asking to be engaged in Krishna's service. Now I'm just wondering, we're offering ourselves. We are the offer in this sacrifice compared to gold or animals or anything. We're the offering. So if we ourselves, we have so many impurities and the false ego and all these, how is it then that we can offer this in a sacrifice? Like
Yeah. That's a good point. So you're saying that we're trying to offer our lives to Krishna, but we're not such a beautiful offering.
well, some of us definitely, but
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's difficult because Krishna, Srinivasru, you have any comments on that?
Prabhupada gives something to the point that someone can be pure. Yeah, someone can be from a Brahmana family, but if he's not practicing purity, he becomes impure.
Mm.
And someone not from a Brahmana family, if he's to practice purity, he becomes pure.
Mm.
Famous quote Prabhupada gives on that. And from Krishna's point of view, he's seeing how much willing we are open for the mercy. Krishna is always looking ways to give mercy to the fallen souls. So if he sees someone's open for the mercy, he'll send someone to guide that person in a way to bring him back to Godhead.
Yeah, That's a nice point.
isn't it?
Yeah, and luckily we're not offering ourselves directly to Krishna. Luckily, like you said, he'll send that person, so we're being passed up.
I mean, it's like your Guru Maharaj mentioned. He says generally, Krishna will guide us through the devotee. He sent a devotee to guide us.
Yeah.
There are rare instances where Krishna will guide within the heart. It's a rare thing when there's no devotees around. And the guide is within the heart. But the thing is, like there are a few examples of that. How Krishna does guide us within the heart. He's guiding every day to us, giving us intelligence what to do. Just like as I was coming back from the Goshala, Kanaya Prabhu was reversing his car, but he was in a tight situation, So Leela Jagannath told me, you have to help him. So I guided the car out for him. From my side, I could have just said, it's not important, forget it, It's not my service. But I thought, Krishna is telling me to help this person.
Sure.
So like that. It could be a small thing, but still, for that person, it's a big thing. So in the Nectar of Devotion, it says, if you want to be Krishna's well-wisher, you have to help others come to Krishna. Because that's Krishna's purpose also, to help the fallen souls come back to him.
Yeah.
So by helping others come to Krishna, you become Krishna's well-wisher. So even though you may not be doing a big service from your point of view, from Krishna's point of view, it's a big service. Because to save a fallen soul, coming back is a big thing. So in that sense, it's a big service.
It's interesting. My spiritual master shared an interesting point that Krishna, when he came to the material world, it's like he had a bad day on book distribution. He didn't capture as many fallen souls as he wanted to. Therefore, he had to come again as Lord Chaitanya to have a more successful mission of spreading Krishna consciousness. Because not that many people, when Krishna came, not that many people took to Krishna consciousness. But when Lord Chaitanya came, then he flooded the whole earth. So my spiritual master said it was like Krishna had a bad day on book distribution. So interesting. Okay, if there's David, sure you had something more?
The question I have is in terms of sacrifice, as you mentioned, material persons that they don't do the sacrifice. But I just trying to understand, or if you'll to explain about how, in terms of what they do in terms of, that they're, they still work very hard, and how that works to their, why do you have to work so hard and all this.
Yeah, so they are still performing sacrifice, but the goal of their sacrifice is different. The goal is only for themselves or for their own material situation, their family, things like that. So their sacrifice, they are still performing, like you said, they have to perform a lot of austerities, but they don't have any concept of doing it for the pleasure of the Lord. So all of these sacrifices that Krishna mentions are in some way linked to him. Process of yoga and different things. So that's the difference. Everyone perform, like you said, everyone has to perform austerities, everyone has to perform sacrifice. But the difference is the understanding behind, why am I working so hard? Am I just working for my own maintenance, or am I doing it for the Lord in some way?
Thank you.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Yes, sir.
Yeah, maybe it's like you're saying to offer a sacrifice is to make something sacred. Now, in one sense, you can offer, if it's offer material goods to some demigods or Krishna, then these goods themselves become sacred. But in David's points, it feels like, the sacrifices that we perform, such as the sacrifices offered that you sort of read out leading up to the chanting of Hare Krishna, there's nothing actually offered, but it's the relationship becomes sacred. Whereas in the material sacrifices, where it's just you sacrifice your family life in order to work harder, you sacrifice your health, or there's still the thing that becomes sacred is sort of the material goods, because that's what all your consciousness is focused on.
Yeah. So that's a good point.
It's almost like a chemical reaction. I remember you learn about this in school. There's two things, and then they have a byproduct.
Yeah.
And the byproduct's always there.
Yes, you're right. People work so hard to try and buy the new car, but then that thing becomes so special to them as their most prized possession, right? Because they've had to work so hard to get it, but they don't have the proper understanding. But yeah, we all do sacrifice. We all have sacred items, but it's up to us what we choose. What we choose to do sacrifice for. What we choose to make sacred in our lives. Jai. Okay, we're well over time, but thank you for all your comments. Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki, Jai. Gaur Bhaktivedanta ki, Jai.